Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. The morning sun cut through the blinds of the modest two-story house in Virginia Beach, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floors. Bradley Cortez stood in the kitchen, spatula in hand, flipping pancakes while three voices competed for his attention. His daughter Rose, 9 years old with her mother's dark eyes, was explaining the intricacies of her science fair project. 6-year-old Marcus sat at the table, building a tower from his cereal pieces, and 4-year-old Emma clung to Bradley's leg, her tiny fingers gripping his jeans as she hummed a song she'd learned at preschool. "Daddy, you're not listening," Rose complained, her hands on her hips in a gesture that reminded him painfully of Della. "I am listening, sweetheart. You're testing which soil grows tomatoes fastest." Bradley set a stack of pancakes on the table and crouched down to Emma's level. "And you little bug, need to let Daddy walk or we'll all starve." Emma giggled and released his leg, scrambling into her booster seat. Bradley caught his reflection in the kitchen window, 38 years old, the gray just starting to pepper his dark hair at the temples. 18 years with SEAL Team 6 had left its marks, visible and invisible. His hands, scarred from 100 operations across 3 continents, were gentle as he cut Emma's pancakes into small pieces. The front door opened and Della walked in, her nursing scrubs rumpled from a 12-hour shift at Virginia Beach General. She looked exhausted but smiled when she saw the scene, her husband playing house dad while their children devoured breakfast. "You're a saint," she said, kissing his cheek. "I'm going to shower and sleep for approximately 100 years. You've got 4 hours before you need to pick up Emma from preschool," Bradley reminded her. 4 hours. That's like a vacation. Della ruffled Marcus's hair and disappeared upstairs. Bradley had retired from active duty 6 months ago, transitioning to a civilian role, training new recruits at the nearby Naval Special Warfare Base. The decision hadn't been easy. SEAL Team 6 had been his life since he was 20. The brotherhood, the missions, the purpose. But watching Rose's last school play via video call from a classified location halfway around the world had crystallized something for him. His children were growing up, and he was missing it. "Daddy, are you coming to my presentation?" Rose asked, syrup on her chin. "Wouldn't miss it for anything, Rosie." The truth was, Bradley had already missed too much. Marcus's first steps, Emma's first words, countless bedtimes and birthday parties. He made a promise to himself, and to Della, the kids came first now. Always. He glanced at the photo on the refrigerator. His old team, 8 men who'd been through hell together. Some of them hadn't made it home. Others carried wounds that would never fully heal. Bradley had been one of the lucky ones, physically intact, mentally sharp, and now he had the chance to be present for his family in a way his own father never had been. After breakfast, Bradley loaded the kids into his Ford F-150 for the school run. Rose chattered about her upcoming field trip while Marcus sang along to the radio, off-key but enthusiastic. Emma babbled in her car seat, her vocabulary expanding daily in that explosive way of 4-year-olds. The elementary school parking lot was its usual chaos of SUVs and minivans. Bradley walked Rose to her classroom, her hand in his. She was getting to that age where she didn't always want to hold hands in public, but this morning she squeezed tight. "Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Rosie." Knock him dead at that presentation. He dropped Marcus at his kindergarten class, then drove Emma to preschool. By the time he returned home, Della was already asleep, her phone on the nightstand, the ringer turned up in case the hospital called. Bradley moved through the house quietly, picking up toys, loading the dishwasher, living the domestic life that 6 months ago he couldn't have imagined. His phone buzzed with a text from his former commanding officer, Cliff Mora, now working private security in D.C. "Here this weekend? Got a job opportunity if you're interested." Bradley typed back, "Maybe." Settled into civilian life, pretty good. "Talk later." The truth was, he didn't miss the work as much as he'd feared he would. He missed the men, the camaraderie, the absolute trust. But he didn't miss the midnight deployments, the months away from home, the constant edge of hypervigilance. He was learning to relax, to exist in a world where not everyone was a potential threat. That afternoon, Bradley picked up Emma from preschool. She ran to him across the playground, her pigtails bouncing, her face smeared with paint from our time. He swung her up in his arms, and she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "Daddy, I made you a picture." It was a stick figure family holding hands under a yellow sun. He was the tall one on the left, Della on the right, and 3 smaller figures between them. "It's beautiful, Bug. We'll put it on the fridge." He strapped her into her car seat and headed to pick up Marcus. The 6-year-old emerged from his classroom with his best friend, chattering about Pokemon cards. Bradley waited patiently while they compared their collections, then extracted his son with promises that his friend could come over for a playdate soon. Rose was last. She climbed into the truck with a triumphant grin. "Mrs. Patterson said my project was the best in the class." "That's my girl." They stopped for ice cream on the way home, a Wednesday tradition Bradley had started. 3 kids, 3 different flavors, one proud father watching them enjoy simple happiness. These were the moments he'd fought for overseas, the reason men like him did what they did. To protect this, to preserve this ordinary, extraordinary life. Della was awake when they got home, standing in the kitchen in yoga pants and one of Bradley's Old Navy t-shirts, her dark hair still damp from the shower. She raised an eyebrow at the ice cream evidence on Emma's face. "Daddy spoils you rotten," she said, but she was smiling. "It's Wednesday," Emma announced solemnly, as if that explained everything. That evening, they ate dinner together at the table, pasta with marinara sauce, Rose's favorite. The conversation flowed easily. School gossip, cartoons, Marcus's insistence that he'd seen a shark in the bathtub. Bradley and Della exchanged amused glances across the table. That silent communication of long-married couples. After dinner, Bradley supervised homework while Della gave Emma a bath. Rose worked through her math problems with minimal complaining, and Marcus practiced his sight words. By 8 o'clock, all 3 kids were in bed, and Bradley and Della collapsed on the couch. "You're good at this," Della said, her head on his shoulder. "At what?" "Being home. I worried you'd be climbing the walls." Bradley thought about that. "I won't lie. It's an adjustment. But I look at those 3 upstairs and I know I made the right call. I got out before I missed everything that matters." Della kissed him. "I'm glad you're here." They watched an episode of some crime show, Della's choice, though Bradley found himself critiquing the tactical errors of the TV cops. Old habits. Around 10, they went upstairs, checked on each sleeping child. Rose sprawled across her bed with a book on her chest, Marcus tangled in his blankets, Emma clutching her stuffed rabbit, and went to their own room. As Bradley lay in the dark, Della's breathing evening out beside him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Peace. The weight of 18 years of war lifting from his shoulders. He'd done his part. Now it was time to be a father, a husband, a man living in the world he'd helped protect. He had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, that world would shatter beyond recognition. Thursday started like Wednesday, like every day that blessed week in April. Bradley made breakfast, Della kissed everyone goodbye before her shift, and the morning school run proceeded without incident. Rose reminded him about parent-teacher conferences next week. Marcus announced he wanted to be an astronaut. Emma sang her preschool songs in the back seat. Bradley spent the morning at the base, running a training evolution with a new class of SEAL candidates. He put them through close-quarters combat drills, noting who had potential and who was faking confidence. A few of them recognized his name, Bradley Cortez, the guy who'd been on the Bin Laden raid, who'd pulled off extractions everyone else said were impossible. He didn't talk about those days much anymore. His phone rang at 11:47 a.m. Della's name on the screen. "Hey, you awake already?" Her voice came through broken, barely coherent. Bradley, you need to come to the hospital. Now." His entire body went cold, that combat instinct kicking in, the one that read danger in a heartbeat. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "It's the kids. Bradley, there was an accident. You need to come now." A sob cut through her words, raw and animal. He was already moving, running for his truck. "I'm on my way." "Which hospital?" "Virginia Beach General." "Bradley, hurry. Please hurry." The line went dead. Bradley drove through red lights, his hands steady on the wheel, even as his mind raced through terrible possibilities. An accident. All three kids were in school. What kind of accident? A fire? A lockdown? Active shooter? His training kicked in, compartmentalizing the fear, letting him function. He reached the hospital in 12 minutes, abandoned his truck in the emergency bay, and ran inside. A security guard tried to stop him, but Bradley's face, whatever the guard saw there, made him step back and point toward the emergency wing. Della was in a waiting room, and Bradley knew before he reached her. Knew from the way she looked, from the presence of a police officer and a hospital chaplain, from the antiseptic smell of death that hung in the air. But knowing didn't prepare him for the words. "They're gone," Della whispered. "All three of them. They're gone." The world tilted. Bradley grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "What happened?" The police officer, a young woman with red-rimmed eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Cortez, I'm Officer Leah Barber. Your children were being driven by your neighbor, Susan Farmer, to a museum field trip. At the intersection of Shore Drive and First Colonial, a vehicle ran a red light at approximately 60 miles per hour. It struck the passenger side of Mrs. Farmer's van. She paused, visibly struggling. The impact killed all three of your children on scene. Mrs. Farmer is in surgery, but expected to survive." Bradley's brain tried to process this. Susan Farmer, their neighbor who'd volunteered to drive because Della was working and Bradley had training. Rose in the passenger seat, probably pointing out things on the route. Marcus and Emma in the back, maybe holding hands the way they sometimes did. Who was driving? His voice didn't sound like his own. Officer Barber exchanged a glance with her partner. "The driver has been taken into custody. He was intoxicated, blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. He fled the scene on foot, but was apprehended 2 blocks away." "Who?" Bradley repeated. "Stuart Hardin, age 23. The name meant nothing to Bradley. Just another drunk driver, another piece of human garbage who decided his convenience mattered more than the lives he might destroy. Except he hadn't just risked lives. He'd ended them. Bradley's legs gave out. He sat heavily in a plastic chair, his head in his hands. 18 years of combat, of seeing friends torn apart by IEDs, of carrying wounded brothers through enemy fire, and nothing had prepared him for this. His 3 babies. His Rose, his Marcus, his Emma. Gone in an instant because some drunk piece of shit couldn't call an Uber. Della collapsed beside him, and they held each other while they shattered. The next hours passed in a nightmarish blur. Paperwork. Identification. The morgue. Bradley saw his children one last time, their small bodies too still, too broken. Rose's hand still had dried glue on it from her science project. Marcus wore the Spider-Man shirt he'd insisted on that morning. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, placed there by some kind EMT who understood that a 4-year-old shouldn't be alone. Bradley memorized their faces. Every freckle, every eyelash. Locked it in his mind alongside mission details and tactical assessments. Another piece of information he'd carry forever. By evening, word had spread. Bradley's phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from his former teammates, from neighbors, from Della's nursing colleagues. His parents drove up from North Carolina. Della's sister flew in from Ohio. The house filled with people who meant well, but whose presence felt suffocating. Bradley stood on his back porch, staring at the swing set he'd installed last summer. Rose's science fair project sat on the picnic table, the tomato plants she'd been nurturing with such care. Inside, Emma's finger paintings still covered the refrigerator. Marcus's toy trucks littered the living room floor. Evidence of lives that had existed this morning. Lives that were supposed to stretch out for decades. First days of school, graduations, weddings, grandchildren. All of it erased because Stuart Hardin had decided to drive drunk at 11 in the morning. Cliff Mora arrived after midnight, when most of the well-wishers had finally left. He found Bradley still on the porch, unseeing eyes on the dark yard. "Brother," Cliff said quietly, sitting beside him. Bradley didn't respond. Couldn't. "I'm so goddamn sorry." They sat in silence. Cliff had been Bradley's swim buddy through Hell Week, had been in the Hello during the Bin Laden raid, had been shot twice in Fallujah, and kept fighting. They'd been through hell together, but this was different. This was worse. "What do you need?" Cliff finally asked. "I need my kids back." "I know, but since that's impossible, I need to know that the piece of shit who killed them is going to pay. Really pay. Cliff nodded slowly. He will. The system will handle it. Bradley turned to look at his old friend, and something in his eyes made Cliff go still. Yeah, the system. The funeral was held on a Tuesday, 6 days after the accident. 3 small caskets, 3 separate services compressed into one unbearable morning. The church overflowed with people. Neighbors, teachers, Bradley's former teammates, families from the kids' schools. Rose's entire 3rd grade class attended, their small faces confused and sad. The preschool teachers who'd loved Emma. Marcus's karate instructor, who'd been teaching him to tie his belt. Bradley delivered the eulogy because Della couldn't speak. He stood at the pulpit and talked about Rose's curious mind, Marcus's infectious laugh, Emma's unstoppable energy. He told stories that made people smile through their tears, and his voice never wavered. Military bearing, Della thought distantly. He could compartmentalize his grief, wall it off, function when he needed to. But she saw his hands shaking when he sat back down. Saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his eyes had gone flat and cold. At the cemetery, Bradley, Della, and their family stood in the April sun while 3 coffins were lowered into the ground. Someone was singing. Someone else was crying. Bradley felt none of it. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and focused. The prosecutor, a woman named Margaret Hoffman, had visited them 2 days ago. She'd sat in their living room, surrounded by sympathy flowers, and explained the case. Stuart Hardin is being charged with 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter, DUI, and leaving the scene of an accident. Given his blood alcohol level and the circumstances, we're looking at substantial prison time. How substantial? Bradley had asked. The sentencing guidelines suggest 15 to 20 years, possibly more given the number of victims. He'll serve most of it. Bradley had nodded. It wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough, but it was something. But Margaret Hoffman had hesitated, her professional mask slipping. I need to be honest with you. There are complicating factors. Stuart Hardin's father is Judge Glenn Hardin, District Court. He's already retained one of the best defense attorneys in Virginia. They're going to fight this hard. Doesn't matter what kind of attorney he has, Della had said, her voice hollow. The evidence is clear. He killed our children. You're right. The evidence is solid. But I wanted you to be prepared for a fight. Now, standing at the graveside, Bradley thought about that conversation. A judge's son, money, connections, the kind of advantages that bent justice to their will. He thought about it, and he filed it away in that cold, calculating part of his brain that had kept him alive through 18 years of combat. After the funeral, people gathered at Bradley and Della's house. Food, shared memories, hollow comfort. Bradley stood in the corner, accepting condolences mechanically. His team showed up in force. 8 men who'd fought beside him in the worst places on earth, now standing in his living room offering the only thing they could. Presence. Brotherhood. Cliff pulled him aside. The word on the street is that Hardin's lawyers are going for a plea deal, trying to knock the charges down to negligent manslaughter, reduce the sentence. Bradley's jaw tightened. He killed 3 children while drunk and ran away. I know, but his dad's connected. Money talks. Then we make it scream. Cliff studied his friend's face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking the prosecutor is right. We're in for a fight, and I don't lose fights. That night, after everyone finally left, after Della had cried herself into an exhausted sleep, Bradley sat in his home office. He pulled up everything he could find on Stuart Hardin and his father, Judge Glenn Hardin. Stuart Hardin, 23 years old, failed out of 2 colleges, multiple DUI arrests that had mysteriously disappeared from his record, suspended license that he'd been driving on anyway. A pattern of reckless behavior enabled by a father who made problems vanish. Judge Glenn Hardin, district court judge for 12 years, reputation for being tough on crime, but known for protecting the wealthy and connected. Married to Violet Hardin, active in charity circles. 1 son, Stuart. Bradley dug deeper, using skills he'd learned in intelligence briefings and mission prep. Stuart's social media, unlocked, arrogant, showed a young man who'd never faced consequences. Photos of him drinking, bragging about how his dad got him out of trouble, mocking the little people who had to follow rules. There was a video from 2 days before the accident. Stewart, clearly drunk, laughing with friends about almost hitting a pedestrian. "Don't worry," he'd said to the camera. "My old man will fix it like always." Bradley watched that video 3 times. Then he opened a new folder on his computer and titled it Justice. He started compiling evidence, tracking patterns, building a file. His SEAL training had taught him patience, planning, precision. But it had also taught him something else. When the rules of engagement failed to protect the innocent, sometimes you had to write new rules. The arraignment was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Margaret Hoffman called to prepare them. "The Hardins are bringing a lot of pressure," she admitted. "The defense is arguing that Stewart has no prior convictions. Because his father made them disappear," Bradley interrupted. "I know. But legally, if they're expunged, they don't exist. We're going to fight, Mr. Cortez. I promise you that. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this doesn't go the way it should." Bradley thanked her and hung up. Then he called Cliff Mora. "I need information on Judge Glenn Hardin. Everything. Who he's connected to, where his money comes from, what he's hiding." "Bradley, I need to know what I'm up against, Cliff." That's all. It wasn't all, and they both knew it. But Cliff had served with Bradley long enough to understand when an order was really an order. "I'll see what I can find." The arraignment came. Bradley and Della sat in the courtroom, holding hands, watching Stewart Hardin shuffle and wearing an expensive suit and a practiced expression of remorse. Judge Hardin sat behind his son, radiating authority and confidence. Stewart pleaded not guilty. His lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Orlando Salazar, argued that Stewart had been suffering from a medical emergency, an adverse reaction to prescription medication mixed with a single drink. He painted Stewart as a victim of circumstance, a young man who'd made an error in judgment but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. The prosecutor countered with the blood alcohol evidence, the witness statements, the fact that Stewart had fled the scene. But Judge Thompson, presiding over the arraignment, set bail at a mere $50,000. Stewart walked out of the courtroom 2 hours after walking in. Bradley watched him go, watched him embrace his father, watched them leave through the back entrance to avoid the cameras. He memorized every detail. The way Stewart walked, the cocky tilt of his head, the total absence of genuine remorse. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Bradley made a brief statement, his voice steady. 3 children are dead. Rose, Marcus, and Emma Cortez. They had their whole lives ahead of them. We're trusting the justice system to hold their killer accountable. But as he and Della drove home in silence, Bradley knew that trust was misplaced. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later, July. In those months, Bradley watched the legal system bend and twist under the weight of the Hardin family's influence. Witnesses recanted their statements after visits from Hardin's investigators. The toxicology report that showed Stewart's blood alcohol level was challenged by a defense expert who claimed the samples had been contaminated. Security footage from nearby businesses that showed Stewart's car running the red light mysteriously developed gaps and glitches. Margaret Hoffman fought hard. Bradley could see that. But she was one prosecutor with a standard budget up against a legal team that could bill $1 million and not blink. Bradley spent those months in a strange limbo. He went through the motions of life, ate, slept, trained recruits, but felt nothing. The house echoed with absence. Della worked overtime at the hospital, unable to be home where every corner held memories. They barely spoke to each other, their grief too raw and separate. At night, Bradley sat in his office, compiling information. Cliff had come through with a dossier on Judge Hardin that revealed a man skilled at hiding his corruption. Hardin had investments in shell companies tied to defense contractors. He'd ruled favorably in cases where he had undisclosed financial interests. He'd made DUIs and assault charges disappear for the children of wealthy donors. And Stewart wasn't his first save. There was a girl, 7 years ago, who'd accused Stewart of assault at a college party. The case had evaporated overnight. The girl had transferred schools and never spoke about it again. Bradley found her name, her story, and added it to his file. The trial began on a sweltering Monday in July. The courtroom was packed with media, victim advocates, and curious onlookers. Bradley and Della sat in the front row, Della's hand gripping his so tight it hurt. Stuart Hardin sat at the defense table looking somber and clean-cut, every inch the promising young man whose life had been derailed by tragedy. Judge Hardin sat directly behind him, a silent pillar of support and implied threat. Over 5 days, the prosecution presented their case. The blood alcohol evidence, the impact analysis, the 911 calls, witness testimony. Susan Farmer, still recovering from her injuries, testified about seeing the car run the light, about the terrible sound of impact, about trying desperately to reach the children in the back seat before losing consciousness. Bradley listened to every word, his face impassive even as the details cut through him. Rose had died instantly, they said. Small mercy. Marcus had lived for 7 minutes, calling for his daddy. Emma had been unconscious but alive when the paramedics arrived, dying en route to the hospital. He filed these facts away alongside the others. Inventory of horrors. The defense's strategy became clear as the days progressed. Minimize, deflect, humanize Stuart while dehumanizing his victims. Orlando Salazar didn't deny the accident had happened, but he reframed it. A terrible tragedy, yes, but not a crime worthy of destroying a young man's future. Stuart had potential, he argued. Stuart had been accepted to graduate school. Stuart volunteered at youth centers. Bradley had verified those claims. The graduate school acceptance was to a program his father's friend ran. The volunteer work consisted of 3 hours spread across 2 years, documented for community service requirements. But Salazar painted a picture that resonated with certain types of people. A good kid who'd made one mistake versus the harsh vengeance of parents who wanted someone to blame for an accident that could have happened to anyone. We all make mistakes, Salazar told the jury during closing arguments. We all have moments of poor judgment. But should one moment of imperfection destroy an entire life? Should we throw away a young man's future because of a genuine tragedy that he deeply regrets? Margaret Hoffman's closing was passionate and angry. 3 children are dead. Rose, 9 years old, who wanted to be a scientist. Marcus, 6 years old, who was learning karate. Emma, 4 years old, who loved to sing. They're gone forever because Stuart Hardin chose to drive drunk in the middle of the morning. Not an accident, a choice. And choices have consequences. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Bradley and Della waited in the hallway, surrounded by supporters, while their world hung in balance. When the jury returned, the forewoman read the verdict. Guilty on 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter. Guilty on DUI. Not guilty on leaving the scene. The defense had successfully argued that Stuart had been in shock and didn't know what he was doing. It was a partial victory. Bradley felt nothing. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the interim, Bradley and Della tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but their house felt like a mausoleum. They kept the kids' rooms exactly as they were, unable to face the alternative. Rose's books stacked on her nightstand. Marcus's action figures frozen in whatever battle he'd been staging. Emma's toys scattered across her floor. Della stopped sleeping in their bedroom. She camped on the couch, the TV playing nonsense to fill the silence. Bradley didn't sleep at all, spending nights in his office, planning. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom filled again. This time, the Hardins brought character witnesses. Teachers, coaches, family friends, all testifying to Stuart's good character, his potential, his remorse. Judge Glenn Hardin himself took the stand, his voice breaking as he talked about his son. Stuart has made a terrible mistake, one he'll carry for the rest of his life. But he's not a criminal. He's a good young man who deserves a chance at redemption. The presiding judge was not Glenn Hardin. He'd recused himself from his son's case, but Judge Frederick Pratt, who'd worked alongside Hardin for years and shared his country club membership. Pratt listened to all the testimony, then delivered his ruling. This court acknowledges the devastating loss suffered by the Cortez family. However, this court also recognizes that Stuart Hardin is a young man with his entire life ahead of him, with potential to contribute meaningfully to society. The court finds that incarceration would serve no rehabilitative purpose and would be unduly harsh given the defendant's lack of prior criminal history and his evident remorse. Bradley felt Della go rigid beside him. Therefore, Judge Pratt continued, the court sentences Stuart Hardin to 5 years supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and mandatory attendance at alcohol education programs. The defendant's license is suspended for 2 years, after which he may apply for reinstatement. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Victim advocates cried out in protest. Margaret Hoffman looked stricken. Bradley sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his face showing nothing. But inside, something had shattered. Not his grief, which was already broken beyond repair, but his faith in the system he'd spent 18 years defending. Della stood up, her voice ringing through the chaos. You're letting him walk? He killed my babies, and you're letting him walk. Judge Pratt's gavel came down. Order. Ms. Cortez, I understand your pain, but this court's decision is final. The defendant has been sentenced according to the law. According to whose law? She screamed. The law that protects drunk drivers? The law that says money matters more than children's lives. 2 bailiffs moved toward her. Bradley stood, placed a hand on her arm. Della, we're leaving. He guided her out of the courtroom, past the cameras, past the smug satisfaction on Judge Hardin's face, past Stuart Hardin's obvious relief. They walked to the parking garage in silence. Only when they were in the truck, doors closed, did Della break down completely. He's not going to prison, she sobbed. He killed our children, and he's not going to prison. Bradley held her while she cried, his eyes on the courthouse through the windshield. He thought about his 18 years of service, the battles fought, the missions accomplished, the absolute certainty that there were good guys and bad guys, and that the good guys would prevail if they were brave enough and strong enough. That certainty was gone now. The system had failed. Justice had failed. The law had failed his children, which meant the law was no longer relevant. He'll pay, Bradley said quietly. I promise you, Della. He'll pay for what he did. She pulled back to look at him, saw something in his face that made her go still. Bradley, what are you going to do? Whatever it takes. That night, after Della finally fell into exhausted sleep on the couch, Bradley sat at his desk and made a decision. He wasn't a man who believed in vigilante justice or in taking the law into his own hands. He'd spent his career as a warrior in service of order and civilization. But order had failed. Civilization had failed. Now all that remained was the most fundamental right of any father, to make those who hurt his children pay. Bradley opened his phone and sent a text to Cliff Mora. I need a team. 6 men. Operational security absolute. I'll explain in person. The response came within minutes. Roger that. When? Tomorrow night. My place. 2,100 hours. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his mind already shifting into mission planning mode. He'd spent 18 years conducting operations behind enemy lines, extracting high-value targets, eliminating threats to national security. Those skills weren't going away just because he'd retired, and Stuart Hardin had just become a high-value target. 6 men assembled in Bradley's garage at 9 p.m. the next night. Cliff Mora, of course, who'd been Bradley's swim buddy and closest friend. Raphael Abbott, a sniper with a gift for long-range precision. Brent Frost, demolitions expert who could make anything explode or go silent. Harry Gates, communications and electronic warfare. Ian Irwin, intelligence specialist. Armando Kraus, medic and close-quarters combat expert. All of them had served with Bradley at one point or another. All of them had families, lives, reasons to say no to whatever he was about to ask. None of them would. Bradley stood before them, and they saw in his face what this was about. They'd all heard about the sentencing, the travesty of justice. They'd all serve alongside men who'd left children behind, and they'd all sworn to protect those children if the worst happened. You know what happened to my kids, Bradley began. You know the piece of shit who killed them got probation. You know his father is a judge who rigged the system to protect his son. He paused, meeting each man's eyes. I'm not asking you to be part of what comes next, but I need to know if any of you are going to be a problem, if you're going to try to stop me, if you're going to report me, because I'm done with the law. I'm done with justice. I'm going to handle this my way, and I need to know if any of you are going to stand in my way. Silence held for a long moment. Then Cliff spoke. What do you need? The question hung in the garage air for 3 heartbeats. Then one by one, the others nodded. Whatever you need, Raphael said. Count me in, from Brent. Harry, Ian, and Armando echoed the sentiment. Not because they condoned vigilante justice in principle, but because they understood what Bradley was, what all of them were. Warriors who'd seen the world's darkness and fought it back. And sometimes, the darkness won through the courts instead of on battlefields. Bradley nodded once, sharply. Then here's what I need to know. Can any of you think of a reason why I shouldn't do this? Any argument that would stop you if you were in my position? Ian spoke up, his voice thoughtful. You've got Della to think about. You do this, even if you don't get caught, it changes you. You'll be living with it forever. And she'll know. She might not know the details, but she'll know. She already knows something's coming, Bradley said. I'm not going to lie to my wife. But I'm also not going to let the man who killed my children walk free because his father has money and connections. What about your parents? Armando asked. Your in-laws? They've lost their grandkids. If you go down for this, they lose you too. Bradley had thought about this. Thought about little else for the past 36 hours. If I do nothing, I lose myself anyway. I can't live in a world where Stuart Hardin faces no real consequences. I can't wake up every day knowing he's out there living his life while my kids are in the ground. Cliff leaned forward. So what's the play? You're not just venting. You've got a plan. Bradley pulled out a laptop and projected a screen on the garage wall. Stuart Hardin's face appeared, along with his daily routine, locations, patterns. For the past 3 months, I've been tracking him. He lives in his father's guest house in Norfolk. Drives a BMW that Daddy bought him. Goes to the same bars, same gym, same coffee shop. He's not in hiding. He's celebrating. The screen changed to show surveillance photos. Stuart drinking at bars, laughing with friends, living his life as if 3 children hadn't died by his hand. He posts everything on social media, Bradley continued. His locations, his plans, who he's with. He thinks he's untouchable because he is, legally. His father made sure of that. So you want to take him out? Raphael said flatly. That's what this is. No. Bradley's voice was ice. I want him to face consequences that actually fit what he did. I want him to understand what he took from me. And I want his father to understand what it feels like to lose a child. That's a tall order, Harry said. You're talking about making someone disappear in a way that can't be traced back to you, in a way that sends a message, without leaving evidence. That's ghost protocol. We've run ghost protocols before. In hostile territory against enemy combatants, Ian pointed out. This is domestic. This is a judge's son. The heat on this will be nuclear. Then we plan accordingly. Bradley clicked to the next screen. I've got 48 hours starting Friday night. Della's sister is taking her up to Ohio for the weekend. She needs to get away from this house, from the reminders. I'll be alone. No alibi, but also no witnesses to what I'm doing. 48 hours, Cliff mused. That's tight. It's enough. Stuart has a pattern. Friday nights. He goes to the Admiral's Club downtown. Gets drunk, usually hooks up with someone, crashes at their place, or goes home around 3 a.m. He'll be vulnerable, impaired, and his guard will be down. Bradley clicked through more screens. Maps, timelines, contingency plans. This was what he'd done for 18 years. Plan operations with military precision. The target had changed, but the methodology remained. I take him Friday night between the Admiral's Club and his next location. Transport him to a secure location where we can have conversation. Then what? Armando asked. You execute him? That's not justice, Bradley. That's murder. I never said I was going to kill him. Bradley's expression was unreadable. I said I wanted him to face consequences. Stuart Hardin has never faced real consequences in his life. His father has protected him from every bad decision, every crime, every hurt he's caused. That protection ends Friday night. Walk us through it, Cliff said. Over the next 3 hours, Bradley laid out his plan in detail. It was thorough, professional, and completely illegal. When he finished, the 6 men sat in silence, weighing the risk against the righteousness of the cause. You understand, we can't be part of the actual operation, Ian finally said. We've all got families, careers. We go down with you. That's a lot of collateral damage. I understand. I'm not asking you to be there. I'm asking you to help me plan it right, to point out the flaws, to help me think through the consequences. The execution is on me alone. Brent shook his head. Bullshit. You think we're going to let you go into an op alone? We're a team. We've always been a team. Brent. He's right. Raphael interrupted. You need eyes. You need backup. You need someone to pull your ass out if it goes sideways. We're in, all the way. Bradley looked at each of them. These men who'd been through hell with him, who were willing to risk everything for what came down to revenge. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, Cliff said. We're volunteering. Now let's plan this thing properly. They worked through the night, refining the plan, accounting for variables, building contingencies. By dawn, they had a solid operational structure that could work if everything went right. What about afterward? Ian asked as they were packing up. Say this works perfectly. Stewart disappears Friday night. The investigation starts Saturday morning. Judge Harden is going to throw every resource at finding his son. Private investigators, maybe even federal involvement. How do you stay clear? I stay visible. Saturday and Sunday, I'm at my parents' place in North Carolina. I drive down Saturday morning, stay through Sunday. They'll confirm I was there the whole weekend. And Friday night, when Stewart actually vanishes, I'm home alone. No alibi, but also no way to place me at the scene. My truck stays in my garage. My phone stays on, pinging the local cell towers. I establish a digital footprint that puts me at home watching TV. While you're actually grabbing Stewart, Cliff said. Ow! Separate vehicle, acquired earlier in the week. No connection to me. Disposed of afterward. I'll walk through the whole op on foot, if I have to. It's 3 miles from Stewart's usual haunts to the extraction point. I've run farther carrying a wounded teammate in full combat gear. Raphael studied the maps again. The extraction point. You've got it marked as the old industrial complex on Granby Street. That's been abandoned for years, but homeless people camp there. Witnesses. I've been surveilling it for 2 weeks. Cleared the area with cash and gift cards. Told them to stay away this weekend. Told them inspectors were coming. They scattered. Jesus, Harry murmured. You've really thought this through. I've been thinking about nothing else since the sentencing. This is happening, gentlemen. With or without your help. I'd prefer with. But I'll go alone if necessary. Cliff stood, put a hand on Bradley's shoulder. You're not going alone. We'll be your eyes in the sky, your guardian angels. You run the op on the ground. We make sure nothing goes wrong from outside. As the team filed out, heading home to their families and their normal lives before committing to something that would change them forever, Bradley stood alone in his garage. The morning sun was rising, painting the sky the same pink and gold it had been the day his children died. 3 days until Friday. 3 days to finalize details, acquire equipment, and prepare mentally for what he was about to do. He went inside, found Della in the kitchen staring at her coffee. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes searched his face. You're doing something, she said. Not a question. Yes. Something illegal. Yes. Will it bring them back? No. Nothing can do that. Della stood, walked to him, put her hands on his face. Will it make you feel better? Bradley thought about that, really thought about it. I don't know if anything can make me feel better. But I know that if I do nothing, if I let Stewart Harden walk free, I'll never be able to live with myself. I'll have failed as a father in the most fundamental way. I'll have let my children's killer face no real consequences. She kissed him, tears streaming down her face. Then do what you have to do. But come back to me, Bradley. I've lost my babies. I can't lose you too. I'll come back. Promise me. I promise. Friday came. Della's sister, Leah Callahan, picked her up mid-morning for the drive to Ohio. Bradley kissed his wife goodbye, held her tight, and watched her drive away. Then he went to work. First, the vehicle. He'd acquired a nondescript Ford van earlier in the week, paying cash to a guy who didn't ask questions and wouldn't remember his face. The van sat in a storage unit across town, registered to a Shell LLC that couldn't be traced back to him. Second, the equipment. Zip ties, duct tape, a black hood, chloroform. Not to knock Stewart out, but to disorient him initially. A burner phone, night vision goggles, a taser for insurance. All of it acquired piecemeal, paid for in cash, no digital trail. Third, the location. The abandoned industrial complex had been a textile factory in the 70s, shut down and forgotten. Bradley had spent the last 2 weeks prepping a room in the basement, soundproofed as much as possible, furnished with a single chair and some basic supplies. A place to have a very serious conversation. By evening, Bradley was ready. He sent a text to Cliff from the burner phone. In position. The response came immediately. Roger. Eyes on target. He's at the Admiral's Club, 3 drinks in. Bradley waited in the van 2 blocks from the bar, invisible in the Friday night crowd. He dressed in dark clothing, nondescript, the kind of outfit that security cameras would capture but witnesses would struggle to describe. A baseball cap covered his face. Gloves covered his hands. At 2:47 a.m., Cliff's text came through. He's moving, heading to parking garage on foot. Alone, Bradley started the van, drove slowly toward the parking garage. Stewart Hardin stumbled along the sidewalk, drunk but functional, his phone in his hand as he texted someone. Probably lining up his next conquest, his next validation that his father's money could buy him anything. He never saw it coming. Bradley pulled the van alongside him in the empty garage, opened the sliding door, and in 2 seconds had Stewart inside, taser deployed, body going rigid, the chloroform-soaked cloth over his mouth for 10 seconds just to disorient him. Zip ties on his wrists, hood over his head, and the door slammed shut. 30 seconds from first contact to clear. Military precision. Bradley drove out of the garage, turned on his side streets, took a circuitous route to the industrial complex. In the back of the van, Stewart was starting to come around, making confused sounds under the hood. Stewart Hardin, Bradley said, his voice flat. You're going to wish you'd stayed home tonight. You're going to wish a lot of things. But mostly, you're going to wish you hadn't killed my children. The noise from the back of the van changed pitch, from confusion to fear. Good, Bradley thought. Fear is just the beginning. He pulled into the factory complex, drove around to the back where trees and collapsed buildings provided cover. The van disappeared into shadows, invisible from the road. Bradley killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to Stewart's breathing, fast and panicked through the hood. This was the point of no return. Once he stepped out of this van, once he moved forward with this plan, there was no walking it back. He'd be crossing a line that 18 years of military service had trained him to respect. But that line had been crossed first, by Stewart Hardin when he drove drunk, by Judge Hardin when he corrupted the system, by every person who'd helped that family avoid accountability. Bradley got out, opened the van door, and dragged Stewart inside the factory. The basement room was exactly as he'd left it. Bare concrete walls, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, a camping lantern providing cold light. No windows, no way out except the door Bradley controlled. He dumped Stewart in the chair, secured his zip-tied wrists to the armrests with additional restraints, then stepped back and removed the hood. Stewart blinked in the light, his eyes wild with terror and residual drunkenness. When his vision cleared and he saw Bradley's face, recognition dawned. You're that guy. The father. The trial. Rose, Marcus, and Emma Cortez, Bradley said quietly. Say their names. What? I don't. Say. Their names. Stewart's voice cracked. Rose, Marcus, and Emma. Those were my children. My 9-year-old daughter who wanted to be a scientist. My 6-year-old son who was learning karate. My 4-year-old who loved to sing. You killed them, Stewart. You got drunk at 11 in the morning and drove through a red light and you killed them. It was an accident. I didn't mean. You chose to drive. You chose to drink. You made a conscious decision that led directly to their deaths. That's not an accident. That's negligent homicide. But you know what the judge called it? A mistake. You know what you got for killing 3 children? Probation. Stewart was crying now, his nose running. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I think about it every day. I didn't want anyone to die. You fled the scene. You ran away while they were dying in that van. You didn't call 911. You didn't try to help. You ran because you're a coward who's never faced consequences for anything in your entire pathetic life. Bradley pulled up a second chair, sat down facing Stuart. His voice remained calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something cold and absolute that made Stuart's terror spike higher. Your father made this easy for you. Every DUI he made disappear, every assault charge he buried, every time he pulled strings to get you out of trouble. He built you into the kind of person who could kill 3 children and think you'd walk away clean. In a way, he's as responsible as you are. Please, Stuart whispered. Please, I'll do anything. My dad has money. I don't want money. I had something more valuable than money. I had my children. You took them from me. Now I'm going to take something from you. Stuart's eyes went wide. Are you going to kill me? Bradley considered the question. Honestly, he'd been asking himself that for 3 days. The easy answer was yes. Put a bullet in Stuart's head, dispose of the body where it would never be found, let Judge Hardin spend the rest of his life not knowing what happened to his son. Poetic justice. But that was too quick, too merciful. Stuart Hardin deserved to suffer the way Bradley was suffering, the way Della was suffering. He deserved to live with the consequences of his actions for once in his privileged life. No, Bradley finally said, I'm not going to kill you, but you're going to wish I had. Over the next 48 hours, Bradley conducted a masterclass in psychological warfare. He learned these techniques in SEER school: survival, evasion, resistance, escape, learning how to withstand torture and interrogation. Now he applied them in reverse, breaking down Stuart Hardin piece by piece. He started with simple deprivation. No food, just water. The light stayed on, preventing sleep. When Stuart dozed off, Bradley would slam his hand on the metal chair, jolting him awake. Hour after hour, question after question, forcing Stuart to confront every terrible decision he'd ever made. Tell me about the girl at Virginia Commonwealth. The one who accused you of assault. Stuart's head snapped up. How do you? Tell me. And Stuart did. In his exhausted, terrorized state, the truth spilled out. The assault had happened. His father had paid the girl's family to drop the charges, then had the case sealed. Stuart had learned that money could make anything disappear. Tell me about the other DUIs. How many were there really? 5. Before this one, 5. Dad made them all go away. Tell me what you were thinking when you got in your car that morning. I don't remember. I've been drinking since the night before. I knew I was drunk, but I needed to get home. I thought I could make it. I always made it before. Until you didn't. Until you killed my children. The hours blurred together. Bradley didn't physically harm Stuart, didn't need to. The isolation, the exhaustion, the forced confrontation with his own culpability broke him down more effectively than any beating could have. By Saturday afternoon, Stuart was a wreck. He'd urinated on himself twice. He was shaking constantly. He'd confessed to everything. The assaults, the drunk driving, the hit and runs, the pattern of behavior enabled by his father's money and power. Bradley recorded it all on a digital voice recorder. Evidence that would never see a courtroom, but that served its purpose, forcing Stuart to acknowledge what he was. Why are you doing this? Stuart asked, his voice hoarse. Because the system failed. Your father corrupted the process that was supposed to hold you accountable. So I'm establishing accountability outside the system. By kidnapping me? By torturing me? That's not justice. You're right. Justice would be you in prison for 20 years, thinking every day about the lives you destroyed. Since I can't have that, I'll settle for this. You spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing that if you ever drive drunk again, if you ever hurt anyone else, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be this merciful. Bradley leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. Sunday night, I'm going to let you go. You're going to wake up on a park bench somewhere with no memory of where you've been or how you got there. You're going to go home to Daddy and tell him you're kidnapped. They'll investigate, they'll find nothing, and eventually it'll become an unsolved case. You're insane. Maybe. But I'm also in control here, which means you're going to listen carefully. You have 2 choices. Choice 1. You take this as a wake-up call. You get serious help for your alcohol problem. You stop letting your father fix your messes. You actually become the person his lawyers pretended you were in court. Someone with potential, someone who contributes to society. If you do that, if you genuinely change, then we're done here. And choice two. Choice two is you go back to being the same entitled piece of shit you were before. You drink, you drive, you hurt people, and you rely on daddy to make it go away. If you choose that path, I will know. I will be watching. And if you hurt anyone else, anyone, I will come back and finish what I started here. Bradley stood up, towered over the broken man in the chair. Which choice do you think you'll make, Stuart? Stuart was crying again, broken sobs that held no dignity. I'll change. I swear I'll change. Please just let me go. We'll see. Bradley administered a sedative, careful dosage, nothing dangerous, and waited for Stuart to lose consciousness. Then he loaded him back into the van, drove to a park near Stuart's neighborhood, and deposited him on a bench with his wallet and phone intact. No physical injuries beyond some bruising from the zip ties. Nothing the doctors would flag as torture. By the time Stuart woke up, confused and terrified, Bradley was already at his parents' house in North Carolina, visible and accounted for. The investigation that followed was exactly what Bradley had predicted. Stuart reported being kidnapped, but his story was confused, contradictory. The toxicology report showed alcohol and sedatives in his system. The police found no physical evidence, no witnesses, no surveillance footage that showed anything useful. Judge Hardin threw his considerable weight behind the investigation, but there was nothing to find. Bradley had been too careful, too professional. His team had covered their tracks perfectly. The digital footprint showed Bradley at home Friday night, then driving to North Carolina Saturday morning. His parents confirmed he'd been with them the entire weekend, helping them with yard work and house repairs. There was no case, no evidence, no leads. But Judge Hardin wasn't the type to give up easily. He hired private investigators, ex-FBI agents, even brought in a team of former special forces who promised they could find anyone. These investigators started looking at everyone connected to Stuart's trial, everyone with a grudge, everyone with means and motive, which brought them, inevitably, to Bradley's door. 3 weeks after Stuart's disappearance and reappearance, a black SUV pulled up to Bradley's house. 4 men got out, all moving with the precise economy of former military. They were armed, not openly, but Bradley could spot the bulges under their jackets. The leader knocked on the door. Bradley opened it, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, a beer in his hand, looking like exactly what he was pretending to be, a grieving father trying to move on with his life. Bradley Cortez, that's me. My name is Donnie Schwartz. I'm working for Judge Glenn Hardin. We're investigating the disappearance of his son, Stuart. We'd like to ask you some questions. Bradley looked at the 4 men, read their body language, calculated threat levels instinctively. Am I under arrest? No, sir. This is just a conversation. Then you can have it from where you're standing. I don't invite people into my house who are here to accuse me of crimes. Donnie Schwartz's expression didn't change. No one's accusing you of anything. We're just trying to get a complete picture of everyone who had contact with Stuart during his trial. I sat in a courtroom and watched him get away with killing my children. That was the extent of my contact with Stuart Hardin. Where were you the night of August 12th? Home alone. My wife was visiting her sister in Ohio. Can anyone confirm that? Nope. Just me, Netflix, and a bottle of whiskey. And the morning of the 13th, drove to North Carolina to visit my parents. Got there around noon, stayed through Sunday. They can confirm. Schwartz pulled out a photo, Stuart, looking haunted and broken. When Stuart Hardin reappeared, he had marks on his wrists consistent with restraints. He described being held in some kind of basement or warehouse. His story is confused, but he's certain he was taken by someone connected to the trial. Sounds terrible. Hope you find whoever did it. You don't seem surprised. Bradley took a sip of his beer. I'm not. Stuart Hardin is a drunk who's been enabled his entire life by a corrupt father. He probably pissed off the wrong people at a bar, got roughed up, and now wants to play victim. But sure, waste your time investigating me. I was at my parents' house in North Carolina, which is a 5-hour drive from here. Kind of rules out me having kidnapped someone the night before. Unless you did it Friday night and drove to North Carolina Saturday. Then why did my truck's GPS show me at home until 6 a.m. Saturday? Why did my phone ping local towers all Friday night? Why did my Netflix account show activity until 2 a.m.? You've got theories, but you don't have evidence because I didn't do anything wrong. It was all true, technically. The truck's GPS and phone record would confirm exactly what Bradley said. The Netflix account had been running on a loop, creating a digital alibi. None of it proved innocence, but it created reasonable doubt. Schwartz studied him for a long moment. Your former SEAL Team 6 was. Now I'm retired. You've got the skills to pull off exactly what happened to Stuart Hardin. I've got the skills to pull off a lot of things. Doesn't mean I do them. We'll be watching you, Mr. Cortez. Good. Make sure you're watching when I'm living my life while your client's son continues to be a drunk who endangers everyone around him. Maybe watch him next time he gets behind the wheel. The investigators left, but Bradley knew they wouldn't stop. Judge Hardin had resources, connections, and an obsessive need to protect his son. The investigation would continue, and eventually they might find something, which is why Bradley had already planned for Phase 2. That evening, Cliff Morris showed up at Bradley's house. They sat on the back porch, beers in hand, speaking in low tones. Hardin's not letting this go, Cliff said. I know. That's why I need you to deliver a message. What kind of message? Bradley pulled out a USB drive. This contains audio recordings of Stuart Hardin confessing to multiple crimes his father made disappear. Assaults, DUIs, hit and runs. Enough to reopen cases if it ever became public. Insurance. Exactly. If Judge Hardin continues to come after me, if he tries to manufacture evidence or pressure the police into arresting me, these recordings get released to every media outlet in Virginia. His son goes to prison, his reputation gets destroyed, and his career ends. Cliff took the USB drive. You want me to deliver this to Hardin directly? No. I want you to deliver it to a lawyer I've retained, Margaret Hoffman, the prosecutor from Stewart's trial. She'll hold it in escrow with instructions to release it if anything happens to me or Della. If I get arrested on false charges, if I die under suspicious circumstances, if Della has an accident, any of that triggers the release. Mutually assured destruction. I prefer to think of it as a treaty. Hardin leaves me alone. I leave Stewart's confession sealed. Everyone goes back to their lives. And if Hardin doesn't accept those terms, Bradley's smile was cold. Then I don't just destroy Stewart's life. I destroy Glenn Hardin's legacy, his career, everything he's built. Let's see how much his power and connections matter when everyone knows he's been covering up his son's crimes for years. Cliff whistled softly. You've really thought this through. I've been planning this out for months, Cliff. Every contingency, every angle. Hardin thinks he's the smartest guy in the room because he wears a robe and sits on a bench. But I've spent 18 years outsmarting people who are actively trying to kill me. A corrupt judge? That's amateur hour. The message was delivered through proper legal channels. Margaret Hoffman, who'd been horrified by the original verdict, agreed to hold the recordings in escrow. She sent a formal letter to Judge Hardin's attorney, outlining the situation. Evidence existed that would destroy Stuart Hardin and implicate Glenn Hardin in obstruction of justice. This evidence would remain sealed as long as the Hardin family ceased all investigation and harassment of Bradley Cortez. The response came within 48 hours. The private investigators stopped calling. The surveillance ended. Judge Hardin, for all his power, understood that Bradley held the nuclear option. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 months later, just as Bradley was starting to believe he might have actually gotten away with it, might have extracted some measure of justice without consequence, Judge Hardin made his move. The doorbell rang at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. Bradley, who'd been up for an hour having coffee, opened the door to find Donnie Schwartz again. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 25 men, all armed, all wearing tactical gear, all spreading out to surround Bradley's house. What the hell is this? Bradley demanded. A citizen's arrest, Schwartz said. Judge Hardin has gathered substantial evidence that you were involved in his son's kidnapping. We're here to detain you until the police arrive. Citizen's arrest? You gotta be joking. Do I look like I'm joking? Bradley assessed the situation rapidly. 25 armed men, all former military or law enforcement by the look of them. Hired guns, private military contractors doing Judge Hardin's dirty work because the legal system hadn't delivered the results he wanted. This was an escalation Bradley hadn't anticipated. He thought the recordings would be enough to keep Hardin in check. He'd miscalculated. Or had he? Bradley stepped out onto his porch, his hands visible, his posture relaxed. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was yours when you thought you could kidnap a judge's son and get away with it. I didn't kidnap anyone. You've got no evidence. And if you think I'm going to let you illegally detain me, you don't have a choice. Schwartz gestured, and 6 of the men moved toward the porch. We've got you surrounded, Cortez. You're outnumbered. Whatever skills you used to have, you're one guy against 25 professionals. Bradley smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a predator wears when its prey walks into a trap. Actually, he said quietly, I think you're going to want to reconsider this play. And why is that? Because you're not looking behind you. Schwartz's expression flickered, just for a second, before he turned. Behind the 25 hired contractors, emerging from the tree line at the edge of Bradley's property, from behind neighboring houses, from seemingly nowhere, were 50 men. All armed, all wearing their old military gear, all standing in perfect formation. SEAL Team 6 had come home. Not just Bradley's old team, the entire squadron. Men he'd served with over 18 years. Men who'd heard what happened to his children, who'd watched the travesty of justice, who'd understood exactly what was happening when Judge Hardin hired private military to intimidate one of their own. Cliff Morris stepped forward from the group, his voice carrying across the yard. Gentlemen, you've just made a tactical error. You thought you were surrounding one retired SEAL. What you've actually done is threaten a member of the most elite fighting force in human history. And we take care of our own. Schwartz and his team looked at the SEALs, looked at each other, and reality set in. They were professionals. They could recognize when they were outmatched. 25 contractors against 50 SEALs? That wasn't a fight. That was suicide. Stand down, Schwartz said quietly to his team. Smart call, Bradley said. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your vehicles and leave my property. You're going to tell Judge Hardin that this gambit failed. And you're going to remind him that the recordings I have are still in escrow, still ready to destroy his son's life if he continues to harass me. The judge isn't going to accept that. Then the judge is welcome to come here himself and explain why he thinks hiring a private army to intimidate a veteran is a good look. I'm sure the media would love that story. Judge hires military contractors to threaten man whose children were killed by judge's son. That's a headline that ends careers. Schwartz held Bradley's gaze for a long moment, then nodded. We're done here. The contractors loaded back into their vehicles and drove away. The SEALs held position until the last SUV disappeared, then broke formation. Several came up to shake Bradley's hand, to clap him on the shoulder, to remind him that brotherhood didn't end when you left the teams. Cliff was the last to approach. You know this isn't over, right? Hardin's going to keep coming. Let him. I've got evidence that can destroy him. I've got brothers who'll stand with me. And I've got nothing left to lose except my life, which I'm willing to risk to make sure Stuart Hardin faces some kind of consequence for what he did. What's the end game here, Bradley? The end game is Judge Hardin realizes he can't win. He can throw money at this. He can hire contractors. He can use every connection he has. But he can't beat me because I don't play by his rules anymore. I don't care about his power or his position. I care about justice for my children, and I will have it. Judge Glenn Hardin sat in his study that night, staring at the report from Schwartz. 50 SEALs. His son's kidnapper had called in an entire military force to protect himself. The recordings Cortez had were legitimate. Hardin's lawyers had verified that releasing them would trigger criminal investigations at state and federal levels. Glenn had spent 12 years as a judge, wielding power and influence, protecting his son from the consequences of his actions. He believed his position made him untouchable, that his money could solve any problem, that the system he controlled would always bend to his will. Bradley Cortez had shown him the limits of that power. What do we do? His wife, Violet, asked from the doorway. We accept reality. Cortez has us in checkmate. If I keep pressing, those recordings get released, and Stuart goes to prison for years. Our family's reputation gets destroyed. My career ends. But he kidnapped Stuart. Maybe. Probably. But we can't prove it, and he's got insurance to keep us from trying. We're done, Violet. We have to let this go. Stuart is terrified. He won't leave the house. He's having nightmares. Good. Glenn slammed his hand on the desk. Maybe fear will do what I never could. Teach him that actions have consequences. Cortez didn't kill him. He could have, easily, but he didn't. He just scared him straight. Maybe that's what Stuart needed. Violet stared at her husband, shock and disbelief warring on her face. How can you say that? Because I'm tired, Violet. I'm tired of covering for him, tired of fixing his messes, tired of watching him destroy lives without remorse. The Cortez children, those 3 kids, they're dead because I enabled Stuart's alcoholism. I made it possible for him to keep driving drunk because I made his arrest disappear. Their blood is on my hands as much as his. What are you saying? Glenn looked at his wife, at the woman who'd stood beside him through 12 years of increasing corruption, who'd benefited from the power and money that came with his position. I'm saying it's over. We leave Cortez alone. We let Stuart live with what he did. And maybe, just maybe, we all learn to be better people. But Glenn Hardin had underestimated 2 things: his own obsession with control and his wife's fierce protection of their son. While Glenn talked about accepting defeat, Violet was making plans of her own. She contacted a man named Pablo Dodson, a fixer who specialized in problems that needed permanent solutions. She didn't tell Glenn. She didn't tell Stuart. She just wrote a very large check and gave Dodson one instruction: make Bradley Cortez disappear. Dodson accepted the job, recruited his own team, and began surveillance of Bradley's house. He watched the routines, mapped the property, identified vulnerabilities. He noted that Bradley's wife, Della, was rarely home anymore. She'd moved into an apartment closer to the hospital, unable to live in the house where her children had been. That made Bradley an easier target. Alone, isolated, vulnerable. Or so Dodson thought. What he didn't know was that Bradley's team was still active, still watching, still protecting their brother. When Dodson's surveillance became obvious, when his team started probing the property defenses, Cliff Mora picked up on it immediately. You've got a tail, he told Bradley. Professional, not cops. 3-man team, rotating shifts. They're planning something. Judge Hardin, that's my guess. He said he'd back off, but someone in his family didn't get the memo. Bradley considered this. Then it's time to end this once and for all. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Judge Hardin needs to understand that threatening me doesn't just endanger me. It endangers him. It's time to stop playing defense and go on offense. Bradley, no more half measures. Cliff, I let Stuart live because I wanted him to face consequences to change his life. I let Judge Hardin walk because I thought the threat of exposure would be enough. But if they're coming after me now, if they're willing to escalate to murder, then I need to show them exactly what they're dealing with. Over the next 2 days, Bradley and his team prepared for what they knew was coming. They fortified his house, installed additional cameras and sensors, established fields of fire and fallback positions. They armed themselves not with SEAL Team 6 equipment. That would be illegal, but with personal weapons they owned legally. And they waited. Pablo Dodson made his move on a Thursday night, 3 a.m., the darkest hour. His team approached Bradley's house from 3 directions, professional and coordinated. They cut the power, disabled the alarm system, and prepared to breach the front and back doors simultaneously. They never made it to the doors. Bradley and his team had been expecting this. The moment Dodson's crew crossed onto the property, lights blazed to life, not from the house, but from strategically placed portable floods that illuminated the entire yard in daylight bright intensity. And Dodson found himself looking at 8 former SEALs in full tactical gear, weapons trained on his team from superior positions. Drop your weapons. Bradley's voice came through a speaker system. You're surrounded, outgunned, and on camera. Every move you make is being recorded and live-streamed to our legal counsel. You have 5 seconds to comply. Dodson, smart enough to recognize when a job had gone sideways, ordered his team to stand down. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Bradley emerged from the house, his rifle trained on Dodson. Who hired you? I want a lawyer. Wrong answer. Cliff, call the police. Let's have them arrested for attempted breaking and entering, attempted murder, whatever the prosecutor can make stick. Wait, Dotson's voice cracked. I was hired by Violet Hardin, Judge Hardin's wife. She paid me $200,000 to make you disappear. Disappear as in kill me? As in whatever was necessary to neutralize you as a threat to her family. Bradley smiled coldly. Thank you. That was all recorded. Now you're going to sit here and wait for the police, and you're going to tell them everything. And if you're smart, you'll take whatever deal they offer you in exchange for testimony against Violet Hardin. The police arrived, arrested Dotson and his team, and took extensive statements. The surveillance footage, the recorded confession, and the evidence of a murder-for-hire plot created an ironclad case. By morning, Violet Hardin was in custody, facing federal charges for conspiracy to commit murder. The story hit the news. Judge's wife hired hitman to kill father of children killed by Judge's son, and the resulting scandal was nuclear. Judge Glenn Hardin resigned from the bench within 48 hours. Stuart Hardin, already a wreck from his own kidnapping, broke down completely when he learned his mother was facing decades in prison. The Hardin family's power and influence evaporated overnight, and Bradley Cortez, the father whose children had been killed with no real justice, finally got to see the system work the way it was supposed to, not through the courts, but through exposure and consequences. 6 months later, Bradley stood at his children's graves on a cold December morning. The headstones were simple but beautiful. Rose, Marcus, and Emma Cortez, beloved children, taken too soon. Della stood beside him, her hand in his. They were separated now. The grief and trauma had been too much for their marriage to survive, but they'd maintained a friendship, a connection forged in shared loss. "Did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Did you kidnap Stuart Hardin?" Bradley had never confirmed or denied it, not even to Della. "Does it matter?" "I guess not. He's in rehab now, I heard. Actually going through a program, not the fake ones his father used to send him to." "Good. Maybe he'll actually change." And his father lost everything. His career, his reputation, his wife in prison. Was that the goal? The goal was justice for our children. I wanted the people responsible to face real consequences. Stuart's in rehab, facing his demons. Judge Hardin lost his power to corrupt the system. Violet Hardin's in prison for trying to have me killed. Everyone paid in their own way. Della squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you're still here. When I heard about the attack on your house, I was terrified. I thought I'd lost you too. You can't get rid of me that easily. I promised you I'd come back, remember?" They stood in silence for a while, remembering their children, mourning the lives that should have been. Then Della kissed his cheek and walked back to her car, leaving Bradley alone with his thoughts. He thought about the path he'd taken, the kidnapping, the intimidation, the final confrontation with the people who'd tried to kill him. He'd crossed lines he'd sworn never to cross, had become something other than the warrior who fought for justice within the system. But his children were dead, and their killer had walked free. The system had failed them. Someone had to make it right. 3 years later, Bradley received a letter from Stuart Hardin. It was handwritten, 4 pages long, and it said everything Bradley had wanted to hear that night in the basement. "Mr. Cortez, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to even read this letter. But I needed to write it anyway, to tell you that I think about Rose, Marcus, and Emma every single day. I think about the lives they should have lived, the people they should have become. I think about the pain I caused you and your wife, the hole I left in your family that can never be filled. I've been sober for 3 years now. Real sobriety, not the pretend kind I did before. I go meetings every day. I work with other addicts, try to help them avoid making the mistakes I made. I'll never drive again. I gave up my license permanently. And I've been paying restitution to victims' funds, trying to do something positive with the privilege I wasted for so many years. I don't know what happened the night I disappeared. I remember being taken, being confronted with everything I'd done, being forced to see myself clearly for the first time in my life. Whoever did that, and I think we both know who it was, they saved my life. Not by being kind, but by showing me the truth. I was a monster enabled by my father's money and power, and I would keep hurting people until someone stopped me. So this letter is to say thank you. I know that sounds insane, thanking the man whose children I killed, But you gave me something the courts never would have: accountability. You made me face what I'd done. And while I can never undo that, can never bring Rose, Marcus, and Emma back, I can make sure I never hurt anyone else. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. But I'm sorry. Every day, for the rest of my life, I will be sorry. Stuart Hardin. Bradley read the letter twice, then put it in a box with his children's things, report cards, drawings, Emma's stuffed rabbit. Evidence that they had lived, that they had mattered, that their deaths had created ripples that changed the world in small but significant ways. He never responded to the letter. Stuart Hardin didn't deserve absolution from the father whose children he'd killed. But the letter confirmed what Bradley had hoped for. Stuart had changed. The fear, the confrontation, the forced accountability had broken through the entitled shell and revealed someone capable of growth. It wasn't the justice the courts should have delivered. It wasn't what Rose, Marcus, and Emma deserved. But it was something, and sometimes something is all you can get. Bradley stood from his desk, looked at the photo on the wall, his 3 children, smiling at the camera, frozen in a moment before tragedy, and made a silent promise. The world was full of people like Stuart Hardin, protected by money and power, enabled by corrupt systems. The world was full of fathers like him, whose children were taken by people who never faced real consequences. He couldn't save everyone. He couldn't fix every injustice. But he could be ready, could stand witness, could be the consequence when the system failed. That was his new mission, his new purpose. And for Bradley Cortez, the warrior who'd spent 18 years defending others, it was enough.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.